Good morning. If we have not met yet, my name is Cody. I'm one of the pastors here at Pillar. Welcome this morning. I'm glad that you are here. Before we jump into our text, I just want to recognize that Tom Mogi was both playing the box drum and the guitar at the same time. So just make sure, I just want you guys to know that you're in the presence of greatness as he is with us. We're going to be in Genesis 12 this morning. Genesis 12. As you're flipping there, I also just want to recognize that we have a team from Michigan that is here. They will be working with a ministry in D.C. this week, but they are also taking time out of their schedule to do a couple projects for us here around the church. So if you guys could just show your appreciation ahead of time for them, welcome them. Make sure to say hi before you head out this morning. So again, we're going to be in Genesis 12 this morning. Genesis 12. Last week we spent, James Ramsire from Pillar Dumfries spent some time working through the call of Abram in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 9. We've got a good bit of text to work through today. So I normally read through the entire passage up front and then work our way through it. We're going to do it a little bit differently this morning. We're going to read, talk about it, and things like that. So again, we're not at a 30,000-foot view of Genesis, but we're also not working on the ground. We're at about a 10,000-foot view, just trying to get the themes of Genesis. Our series title is Genesis: Foundations of Our Faith. And so we're just trying to see how God worked from the very beginning in our faith to affect us today. So our kids' question of the week this morning is, what direction does Lot travel? We'll be paying attention for that. So I'm going to pray, and then we will dive in. Lord, we are grateful to be in your house this morning. Lord, I know life can get busy, can get hectic, can get crazy. And so, Lord, I'm just thankful that you've built into our schedules, built into the rhythms of our life, a time for us to come together, to be able to put everything to the side and just focus on you, on being able to encourage one another, Lord, on being able to sing praises to you, being able to work through your words to us, to be able to hear what you have to say to us, Lord, to be able to take communion with one another. Lord, I'm grateful for that. So Lord, I ask that you would speak through me this morning, Lord. Spirit, work in ways that are beyond our comprehension to continue to form us into your image. Lord, help us to love you and to know that we are loved by you. Lord, we love you, we praise you, and we ask these things in your Son's name. Amen. In 2019, I got the chance to go to Yellowstone National Park. It was an incredible experience. I'm really grateful for it. Now, if you know anything about Yellowstone, you know that it holds a famous geyser, right? These water that just shoots out of the ground extremely hot. The name of the geyser is Old Faithful. Old Faithful. It's called Old Faithful because more or less it shoots out hot water at a regular interval. Now, when I heard about Old Faithful, at least in elementary school and things like that, I basically heard that you know exactly when the water is going to shoot out. Every 45 minutes on the dot, boom, it's going to shoot out. The thing is, it actually does not work on an extremely precise interval. Geologists try to predict when it will shoot off, and they're pretty accurate, but they can go up to about 10 to 15 minutes off. Now, in the grand scheme of things, as you're sitting there, 10 to 15 minutes off doesn't sound like a long time. But when you're sitting there with a bunch of other people, and you're tired from walking all day throughout the park, 10 minutes seems like forever. When you're in the middle of anxiously waiting, it seems like Old Faithful isn't actually all that faithful. I think we can do the same thing with God, right? When we look back on our lives, we can see His faithfulness and how He has carried us through hard times, spared us from other hard times, and has continued to care for us. But when you're in the middle of things, when you're waiting for the geyser to go off, it can be really hard to actually trust God's faithfulness. And we'll see in our text today that we're not alone in this. As we look back on Israel and how God protected them, and how he cared for them and continued to rescue them, we're reminded of his faithfulness. But as we look at the overall picture, we can sometimes forget that these were real people who were in real life situations and didn't get to know what God had at the end for them. At times for them, it seemed like life was chaotic and that the chaos would overwhelm God's faithfulness. Particularly, we'll see that this morning in the life of Abram. So the main idea for this morning is this: cling to God's faithfulness in the highs and the lows. Cling to God's faithfulness in the highs and the lows. As we pick up from last week, things are on a bit of a high. God has just called Abram out among all of the people of the world and said to Abram that God would bless him and bless all of the world through Abram. And then Abram responded to this call in faith. He could have just ignored it, but instead he responded to the call in faith and got up and moved his whole family, all that he had, to do what God called him to do. And then God shows Abram the land of Canaan and told Abram, this is yours. This is going to be yours. And Abram builds an altar to God and continues to journey on, and things are going well. God is blessing Abram, and Abram in turn is living with the appropriate response. He's living and acting in faith. But things take a quick turn downhill. Take a look at verse 10. It says, there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to stay there for a while, because the famine in the land was severe. Now stop and think about this with me for a moment. God has called Abram to leave home and to go to a land that he will give Abram. God then shows him this land. Abram builds an altar, and then what? It says he continues journeying on. He goes to the Negev. So put yourself in Abram's shoes just for a moment. You've been given this promise by God himself, but now some time has passed. You've settled in the Negev, which is a desert, by the way, not the greatest place to live. What would be going on in your mind? I don't know about you guys, but to me, it would seem like God has promised me something and then has forgotten to come through on that promise. And then add on top of that, there's now a famine in the land that you settled in. So now you have to pick up and move again with all of the people that are with you. I mean, come on. You picked up your entire family and livelihood, and you've only ended up in a desert where there's famine. Like, what is God doing? It says then, as Abram gets to Egypt, he remembers something. In verse 11, we read that when he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "Look, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' They will kill me, but you will live, or let you live. Please say you're my sister, so it will go well with me because of you, and my life will be spared on your account." Abram is waiting for Old Faithful. He's been promised the guys will go off. God will come through. But the timing seems to be just a little bit off. It seems like it's done. It seems like it's not going to happen. And so Abram, at this point, thinking that God has given up, thinks he's going to die. Yes, God promised that a people would come from Abram, but since it doesn't seem like it's going to happen, so now what does Abram do? He goes into self-preservation mode. If God won't come through for him, then Abram's going to come through for himself. But this self-preservation comes not just at his expense, but at the expense of his wife. In verse 14, we read that when Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh. So the woman, Sarai, was taken to Pharaoh's household. He treated Abram well because of her, and Abram acquired flocks and herds, male and female donkeys, male and female slaves, and camels. So Abram comes out looking all right at the end of this. He acquires more people. He acquires more possessions. His wealth increases. But notice what happens to Sarai. She's taken into Pharaoh's household to be his wife. This is an unsanitized, raw picture of a real-life decision made by the guy whose God's people would come through. Abram gives up his wife, the one he's supposed to care for, the one he's supposed to love, the one he's supposed to protect. He gives her up for whatever to happen to her so that he can be safe. Now, we can have a tendency to try to make the Bible simple, try to make it black and white. So my temptation here is to villainize Abram, to chastise him. Like, how can you do this? How can you lose your mind like this? But the truth is, it took a lot of faith for Abram to go when God asked him to go and didn't show him where to go. Just one chapter earlier, Abram displayed immense trust in God and followed him. He's also the same man who will go on to do great things through faith in God. He'll go on to become the father of Israel. He's a great man. And yet, here he is seeing his wife whisked away from him and into the house of another man because he wanted to protect himself. It's not simple. It's not black and white. It's a messy portrait. The more that I think about it, the more I'm actually encouraged by this. As I look at my own life, it's not all that black and white. I'm sure that you would say the same thing. I have had these incredible moments of prayer, overwhelmed by God's goodness, and in the next moment doubt that He can take care of the smallest problems in my life. My life is tangled up with both good and bad, faith and distrust at times. I surrender to Him, and then I try to take my life back. So when I see this messy portrait of Abram, this picture of reality, I'm actually encouraged. Because here's what it shows me. Even one of the greatest men to ever live is just as sinful as I am. He's just as sinful as we are. He's not sanitized. He's not perfect. He's a selfish man with sinful desires. And as we look at Abram, we're reminded that it doesn't depend on us. It depends on God's faithfulness. And that's a good thing, particularly in this passage, because remember what's at stake. God has promised Abram what? He's promised a great nation. And now Abram has put that in jeopardy. His self-preservation seems like it's going to thwart the faithfulness of God. But just when things seem down, when Abram is at his lowest point, when his sin has gotten a hold of him, and Sarai is suffering the consequences, God comes through. God reminds us that His faithfulness is never ending. We read in verse 17, "But the Lord struck Pharaoh and his household with severe plagues because of Abram's wife Sarai. So Pharaoh sent for Abram and said, 'What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister so that I took her as my wife? Now here is your wife. Take her and go.' And then Pharaoh gave his men orders about him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had." In the middle of Abram's sin, God shows His faithfulness by rescuing Abram and Sarai from himself. It turns out Abram's sin isn't too big for the faithfulness of God to overcome. God promised that He would make a great nation out of Abram, and He will come through on that promise. And so Abram leaves Egypt, right? The Lord strikes Pharaoh. Pharaoh sends them out. And so Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, at the beginning of chapter 13. He, his wife, and all he had, and Lot with him. Abram was very rich in livestock, silver and gold. He went by stages from the Negev to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had formerly been, to the site where he had built the altar. And Abram called on the name of the Lord there. Now, Lot, who was traveling with Abram, also had flocks, herds, and tents. But the land was unable to support them as long as they stayed together, for they had so many possessions that they could not stay together. And there was quarreling between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land. Again, we're on a high. Right? We've seen this U, right? We've started on a high, gone down low, and God has proved his faithfulness once again. And that's where we're at. We're at the beginning of a high. At this point, Abram is probably overwhelmed by the faithfulness of God. Abram has been redeemed. He's been rescued from his own sin. And not only that, but he actually left Egypt with more than he entered. In fact, he has so much that he and Lot can't stay together. The land can't sustain them. But no worries. No worries. Look at what Abram says. So Abram said to Lot, "Please, let's not have quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, since we're relatives. Isn't the whole land before you? Separate from me. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Lot looked out and saw that the entire plain of the Jordan, as far as Zoar, was well watered everywhere, like the Lord's garden and the land of Egypt. This is before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose the entire plain of the Jordan for himself. Then Lot journeyed eastward, and they separated from each other. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, but Lot lived in the cities on the plain and set up his tent near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were evil, sinning immensely against the Lord. Again, Abram is in a place of trusting the faithfulness of God. God has just put his faithfulness on an incredible display for Abram. And so, trusting the faithfulness of God, he simply tells Lot to choose where he wants to go. Hey, you see it all. You choose where you want to go, I'll go the opposite direction. He doesn't feel protective over anything. But then Lot chooses the much better looking portion. It describes the plain of the Jordan as being like the Garden of Eden, and we went at lengths talking about the abundance that was in the Garden of Eden. So now, put yourself again in Abram's shoes. You've been told that God will give you a nation. He's going to bless you. Couldn't you have swayed the situation, God? I mean, I can imagine him saying that, saying, "You said you were going to bless me, and now you give my cousin the good land?" Like, I know you showed me Canaan before, and you told me that it's mine, but if you really wanted to bless me, wouldn't you kind of abandon that and give me the good part? And I'm sure that you've been there. You've been praying for your PCS, and then you find out that you get your third choice, and all of your friends are getting their dream duty station. It seems like everyone else's kids are doing great, but yours are just struggling. It seems like you're doing all the right things, but nothing seems to be going your way, and it seems like everyone else is enjoying the life that you want to live. I mean, come on, God. I'm following you. Why is everyone else getting the best portion? And to Abram in this moment, it may seem like God is giving him second-class faithfulness. Sure, he's being faithful. He's giving him land. But he's not being the most faithful, right? Now, that's what it could seem like. But I want you to notice something with me. What direction does it say that Lot went? It says that he went east. Why does that matter? Well, when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, what direction were they sent? East. When Cain was banished from the Lord's presence, what direction did he go? East. Where do the people who built the Tower of Babel come from? come from the east. You see, when we read that Lot traveled east, this is no coincidence. Instead, it represents Lot going away from the presence of God. So while it may seem like God is giving Abram the leftovers and giving Lot the best, it actually turns out that this is for Abram's good. Just when Abram might begin to again doubt the faithfulness of God, God comes through again to remind him. Look at verse 14. It says, after Lot had separated from him, so Lot heads east, the Lord said to Abram, look from the place where you are. Look north and south, east and west, for I will give you and your offspring forever all the land that you see. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust of the earth, then your offspring could be counted. Get up and walk around the land through its length and width, for I will give it to you. So Abram moved his tent and went to live near the oaks of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. Just when Abram might be doubting the faithfulness of God, God reminds Abram that he has something better. He's giving Abram all of this land, and is giving him the opportunity to father a nation that will know God personally. A nation that will be God's chosen people. God has said it will be so, and he will not fail. Abram just needs to cling to God's faithfulness, even as the timing seems to not be working. And so know this, I'm not saying that everyone else who's living in abundance in your life is in sin or is leaving the presence of God. Here's what I do know, though. God has promised that for those who love him, he is working all things together for his glory and for their good. When it seems like everyone is receiving God's favor but you, cling to God's faithfulness. He has intricately formed you and knows what you need. He will come through in the best way possible for you, even if it's not what you have in mind. And so, as we continue in the narrative, we're back on another high. So at first, it was Abram's own sin that was getting in the way. Now it seems like maybe God's giving favor to someone else over him. But the Lord keeps coming through and showing, no, he has what is best for Abram. So as we continue, we're on a high. We're in a period of rest. Abram has settled down and is a nomad no more. But again, things quickly take a turn for the worst. It just feels like we're on a little bit of a roller coaster. At the beginning of chapter 14, a rebellion breaks out in the region. It's 4 kings against 5. And as it reads, this is no small battle. It involves multiple nations and covers a large area of land. Even land that was not ruled by these kings is affected. The entire region, it seems, is at war. But at first, it seems like Abram might be able to wait this one out. Maybe God's faithfulness shows itself in keeping him unaffected. But we find that's not the case. In chapter 14, verse 11, we read, the 4 kings took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food and went on. They also took Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, for he was living in Sodom, and they went on. The promise of God is again in jeopardy. God didn't promise that the great nation would come through Lot, but Abram feels responsible for him. He feels responsible for Lot. He can't just leave Lot to become a slave. He dragged Lot out to this region in the first place. Lot was probably having a pretty good life. So he's left with a decision. Go into the battle and rescue Lot, or wait it out, see what happens. We find in verse 14 what he does. It says, when Abram heard that his relative had been taken prisoner, he assembled his 318 trained men, born in his household, and they went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he and his servants deployed against them by night, defeated them, and pursued them as far as Hobah to the north of Damascus. He brought back all the goods, and also his relative Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the other people. He chooses to enter the conflict, but God again proves faithful. He gives Abram the victory. You see, outside chaos, outside forces in Abram's life could not overwhelm the faithfulness of God. God is sovereign over all things, even conflicts that seem to overwhelm us. It may seem at times like He's not, but we know that God works within the chaos, meeting us there, walking alongside us, and can give us real victory. He holds the power for us to overcome outside things that seem to wreck our life for His glory and for our good. And so again, right back to where we started, Abram's in a pretty good place. He's, again, on a high. He's had some lows, but he's back on a high. He has just won this huge battle. He's gathered the spoils, and then he goes to meet the king of Sodom, whom he just freed, and the king of Salem, who we're just now introduced to. And this king's name is Melchizedek, and he's described as a priest to God Most High. It is at this meeting that we encounter God's faithfulness again through a blessing. Melchizedek blesses Abram, saying, Abram is blessed by God Most High, that is Yahweh, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has handed over your enemies to you. Abram's been through it, but God has prevailed. He will not let Abram down, and just when we think we can breathe again, something again seems to threaten the blessing that Abram will receive. In verse 21, it says, Then the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the people, but take the possessions for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand in an oath to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread or sandal strap or anything that belongs to you. So you can never say, I made Abram rich. I will take nothing except what the servants have eaten. But as for the share of the men who have come with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, they can take their share. What threatens the promise this time? There's no sin of Abram, it seems. There's no chaos, and it doesn't actually seem like he's neglected. Melchizedek is a priest of God Most High, is a king, and is coming to talk to him. Seems like things are going pretty well. Where's the issue? Well, put yourself in Abram's shoes. You've been through the ringer. God has still not given you a son. It seems like the geyser should have gone off by now. So when the king of Sodom offers you wealth beyond measure, what's the temptation? The temptation is to abandon the promise of God and fast-track your own prosperity. God promised that He would make Abram great. So for Abram to take Sodom's wealth would have been to go east with Lot. It would have been an act of Abram putting trust in himself and doing what he needed to do to create his own blessing. But that's not what Abram does. He rejects the king of Sodom's offer. He trusts in God's provision, knowing what God has in store for him is better than what the world could offer him. How is that? How is he able to muster the ability to be able to reject this wealth? Well, it's no coincidence that Melchizedek's blessing preceded Abraham's rejection of fast-tracked provision. You see, when we're reminded of the faithfulness of God and of His consistent blessing, anything that the world has to offer looks tasteless. It loses its appeal. It is through a king and priest to God that Abram is reminded of the Lord's faithfulness to him. And it is through this priestly king that Abram can resist giving in and is reminded that God does come through. And this is a blessing for us because Abram is not just some guy. The faithfulness of God to Abram has major ramifications on the world, on us. You see, it is through a descendant of Abraham that a future priest king would come, who would be the clearest display of God's faithfulness. We see His faithfulness as Jesus meets us in our sin. He meets us in the muck and mire that we create and cleanses us. He doesn't ask us to clean up ourselves, but meets us in the mess and redeems us. He mediates for us on our behalf as a good priest does and intercedes for us. We see his faithfulness as Jesus gives us what is best. It may seem like others have it better, but Jesus tells us that he knows the number of hairs on your head. He knows you personally and intimately and is currently interceding for you now. He wants what is best for you and will make it happen. He's the good king who loves us and cares for us and provides for us. We see his faithfulness as Jesus meets us in the chaos of our life. Even when it seems like nothing is going our way, and when we can't find time to slow down, it feels like we're overwhelmed, Jesus meets us there to remind us that he is present. He gives us the Holy Spirit to give us peace, to comfort us, to remind us of his love. He's the king who has the power over outside forces in our life. And we see his faithfulness as Jesus gives us what the world cannot. We can try to find satisfaction in many things, but it's just a rat race. It leaves us wanting. But Jesus tells us that he has water that will not leave us thirsty and bread that will cure our hunger. He has what we need, and he is the one who can truly satisfy us. He's the king who gives us the best possible life and the priest who connects us to the giver of all life. And so it doesn't matter where you are in life. You might be in a low, anxiously waiting for Old Faithful to burst out of the depths of the ground. And it may seem like it's taking forever. You might be on a high, where you're seeing the beauty of Old Faithful on full display. No matter where you are, in a high or a low, cling to God's faithfulness. Rest in the promise that he will never leave you or forsake you, even if you feel alone or forgotten. He will always come through, and his timing makes more sense than ours does. Trust God today as we know that he is with us. Lord, we are thankful for your faithfulness to us, Lord. As I look back over my own life, I can see so many times where I felt overwhelmed by my own sin, overburdened by everything that life has brought, Lord, when I have felt forgotten and abandoned. Lord, but you have consistently come through. You continue to meet us where we are and continue to show your faithfulness to us. Lord, I've also been on times of a high where I can take your faithfulness for granted. So, Lord, I pray that when we are in those moments, Lord, that we would be consistently reminded that you are present with us, Lord, and that all that we have is from you. So, Lord, I pray for all of us in this room this morning, no matter where we're at, Lord, to help us to rest in your faithfulness, to cling to your faithfulness, even when it feels difficult to do. Lord, we love you. We praise you, and we ask these things in your Son's name. Amen.